My name's Tiger.
I'm Jake.
In 2024, we participated in the Tinny Rally, so driving a 12-foot tinny along the Murray River from Mildura to Mannum in South Australia. We're also known as the Postie Boys because as part of the trip we rode a couple of postie bikes down from the Central Coast to Mannum and then continued on after the Tinny Rally along the southeast coast and back up to the Central Coast. So what boat did we have? We bought a 12-foot tinny with a 15 horsepower early 90s Johnson and it had a bimini, 2 seats. It was fully registered at the time in New South Wales and yeah.
What did it need done?
What it need done, so we just gave it a full service. There was a couple of pinholes in the hull that we repaired prior to the trip, but then also on the trip we had a few pop up that we had to repair on the water. The motor size for a 12-foot tinny, 15 horsepower is way too small. If we were to do it again, we'd probably do it with a minimum 25, if not minimum 30. And we're lucky because Dan had a backup motor, which was a 25, which we ended up swapping out with. And even with 25, a fully loaded boat with all the fuel, at times it would struggle to get on the plane. And so that's probably a recommendation is make sure you actually do a proper, fully laden run prior to the rally.
Don't underestimate the weight of fuel and water.
Yeah. The other one is amount of fuel we took. So we had 100 litres of fuel, and I would be pretty comfortable to do that again with 100 litres with a 25 or 30 horsepower motor.
How close did we run it? Like, do you reckon we had 10 litres at the lowest point?
Yeah, at the lowest point we would have had 10 litres, but that was also by choice because we decided not to fill up a couple of times and run the gauntlet. But yeah, 100 litres of fuel at all times, I reckon you're pretty gravy.
Mm-hmm.
If I was to do it again, I would probably have 2 tanks set up with a diversion valve or like quick disconnect. So then you can have your fuel tanks mixed and ready to go and you can just disconnect and reconnect.
Any tips on mixing the fuel, like mixing your 2-stroke oil?
Yeah.
Try not to do it in the boat if possible.
Yeah, so definitely with the mixing part, definitely don't buy... We bought the big 4-litre 2-stroke oil and we bought it at BCF before for the whole trip just because in terms of pricing, because it's way cheaper that way. However, if we would do it again, we would just buy the 1-litre ones with the little mixing compartment with it, because once you're actually in the boat and trying to mix it with a mixing jug, it just becomes way too messy, especially you find when you're on the run and you run out of fuel. It's not worth it. The other thing is...
Bring as little as you think you can get by with. So between weight and just room in the boat, finding things quickly, if you bring the bare minimum, you'll have a better time, I think.
Yeah, especially it all depends on the size of your boat. With a small tinny, everything's also most likely going to be getting wet, so you want to have dry bags. And yeah, less is more. You don't really need much. You're pretty much just sitting around, maybe on a chair on the riverbank. You don't actually need much to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Definitely set up your boat well beforehand. So make sure that you've got a position or a spot to put your fuel tanks that are easy to get, especially when you're in the middle of the river and needing refuel. A spot where all your food is and isn't getting damaged or thrown around. A spot where all your bedding is nice and dry and secure. What else?
That's it. Yeah. Just if you pack last minute in a tinny, there's only really one area for everything to fall to the middle and just become messy. So we worked hard to try and keep things in rough locations. But it was a battle from beginning to end. So if you have predetermined storage spots and you pack the minimum, you should be okay.
Yeah.
Most of our cooking was done in a jet boil.
Yeah.
We didn't take anything as far as cast iron cooking or we also had to continue our trip on motorbikes afterwards. So we had to pack pretty light to begin with. But even us, we still ended up with quite a full boat. But yeah, we cooked.
We had, for breakfast, we'd have oats and eggs on the first few days. Then we would have lots of cans of baked beans. We had a couple of loaves of bread.
Well, true. We
had
no refrigeration. We didn't.
Yeah.
We didn't take a fridge, so everything we ate had to be sort of non-perishable.
And we didn't take an esky either.
Yeah.
And we didn't take alcohol.
Pretty grim.
But we had a great time, nonetheless.
One thing I was surprised at was how cold it got, especially as a passenger.
Yeah.
Once you're sitting underneath the bimini, and if a little wind kicks up and you're moving at a bit of speed, you're not moving much, so you're just getting quite cold. You maybe cop a little bit of spray. So I'd recommend a spray jacket.
Yeah.
And a thin, warm layer of clothing. Because you may wake up on a warm day, but once you get up to speed, it's actually quite cold.
One of the biggest things that we noticed was just the amount of noise. So being next to a 2-stroke motor for 7 days isn't great. So we definitely recommend either earmuffs, and you can get like the Bluetooth ones, or earplugs, or a combination of even both. Just because of that constant hum of the motor's pretty exhausting. The other one is spray in the face, especially because we had low gunnels and a small boat. Whenever there was any chop or boats would go past us, you'd definitely get a bit of spray onto the face. Then the second one was just the wind, and also then the sun. Anytime you're on the water, it's the reflection off the water's surface that gets you. Another one is gloves. So especially with a tiller steer, your hand's constantly in the sun, so you're just constantly getting railed by the sun. So one of the biggest things with the Tinny Rally, which I like, is that what you take in, you take out. That includes your own waste, human waste.
So we fashioned a poo tube out of 100 mil. Was it 100 mil?
So it was actually 90 mil. PVC pipe, and we just put a cap on one end and a screw top on the other. So a poo tube's pretty common in the hiking world, especially when you're in the alpine region. But yeah, the poo tube worked really well, sealed up nice and tight.
That's also a pretty minimalist solution. If you have the space and the horsepower to carry something heavier, you can bring a nice camping toilet, a dedicated camping toilet.
Yeah.
Camping gear. We took hammocks and ultralight tents. So we had the choice. If we had a nice sandbank to pull up on, we pitched the tent for the night. And if we were feeling adventurous and wanted to pull up where there wasn't flat ground, we still had the option to sleep nicely because we had the hammocks, which just require a few trees and whatever gradient.
The hammocks allowed us to camp on some really cool spots. And I'll put a video over this to show one of the really cool spots that we did camp.
How many hours? You're probably sitting on, what am I trying to say? We're probably pretty flat stick for 6 hours a day.
Yeah, I'd say that. It all depends on, every day's sort of different. I know this coming year they're going to have the days a bit more consistent in terms of distance. And also this coming year they're going to have better fuel drops, so you'll actually be met at the water's edge for the fuel, which is a huge advantage, because on our trip we had to do a couple of trolley missions, which was cool and fun. It was a bit like it added to the adventure, but this coming year I think it'll be a bit easier. But yeah, it was probably 5-6 hours, but again it depends what time you start. Like, we were pretty cruisy. We'd get up, enjoy your breakfast, enjoy your coffee, sit around, all the other boats would pass us, and then we were usually one of the last ones to leave, but then we'd also be one of the last ones to arrive. But we also found that we were never sort of in a rush. We were going at a pretty cruisy pace. And again, I guess it depends what size motor you've got and what size boat. We were probably on the slower side of things.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Slowest.
Definitely not the slowest. Yeah. I think, on that part of so there was like every team was different. There was one team that was, they were constantly a day ahead of everyone. And they, just because they had a 20 horsepower motor with a more gear in it.
I think they were worried about not finishing on time, so they maintained a healthy lead.
Yeah. But I think they would have had a completely different experience to the experience we had, who were cruising on the tail end and getting amongst some of the adventurous stuff that happened, which made it memorable for us.
Yeah, you want a boat with enough capacity that you can, if you choose to slow down and spend a bit more time in an area, it'd be nice to play some catch up and meet up with the main cohort of group that evening. You don't want to have to spend too much time ahead of the group or be so far behind that you just can't catch up. So allow for that when sizing your motor.
Yeah. Camping spots and locations. Every day you can choose to camp with people, or you can choose to go and find your own spot. You're given a rough area where they recommend you camping. Again, you don't have to follow it. And then it's pretty much finding a nice spot that you want. So you might be close with some of the other teams or some of the other crews, and you might say, oh, okay, let's all camp together. Or you might find that some crews might be annoying or really loud, or you get over being with them for 6 days, so you might want to go do your own thing, or you might just find a really cool spot that is only small enough for the pair of you, or so you sort of do whatever you want with camping positions. But locks, so navigation locks, so for a lot of people, myself included, never actually utilised a navigation lock. Seen them, but never actually utilised them. So that was an experience in itself. What are your thoughts?
It was very novel and it was fun. Stressful a few times because as you're in the lock, you have to wait until it fills up or releases so that you can move from one level to the next. And oftentimes you'll tie off to the ladders embedded in the lock walls so that you don't move around. But you have to be quite aware of the water level change because you're tied off, and so you might find yourself in a bit of trouble unless you keep eyes on your ropes. So that's just something to be wary of, but you'll discuss that before you sort of go into the first lock.
Yeah. And probably something that we'd do in the future is have more dedicated ropes. So in those locks, it's nice to be able to have at least a rope on the front and a rope on the stern, to be able to throw around or tie off to other boats. We didn't really have too many dramas, but we were always finding that it was a bit of a dance that we played in the locks. The other one is, depending on what boat you've got, is just having fenders. Because we were sort of going ultralight, we just used the big cheap yellow life jackets on the side, which they worked fine. But if we had a nice boat, we'd definitely use some fenders. The navigation locks is because it's such close quarters. Sometimes you might have 10 boats in one lock. It's just getting comfortable with steering your boat and not being too rev heady with it. So I think that's probably something that I'd recommend practicing, is just being able to steer your boat in close quarters. So a good practice is probably just like pulling up to jetties and holding and being able to manoeuvre around a jetty pretty well.
The things to look forward to is I was surprised by the amount of bird life.
Yeah.
That was cool. That was just
really cool.
You were never left alone the whole river length. There was always birds arguing or swooping or flying around, and that was one of the things that surprised me.
Yeah. And other sort of wildlife we had, there was people saw snakes crossing the river. We saw a kangaroo crossing. What else? There's an emu. Someone saw an emu crossing the river, which is pretty wild. Is fishing. So both of us aren't big fishos, but we decided to take just a couple of cheap $6 hand lines and a couple of hooks. We also just got a cheap little yabby net from, again, Kmart, which that worked perfectly. So we'd pull up, we'd just throw some scraps of whatever we had in the yabby net, throw it in the water, and then about 10 minutes you'd have some yabbies to put on a hook and throw in. We weren't doing anything technical. It was just a hook and sinker, and we caught a lot of carp. Yeah, we're always catching carp. Yeah, which we did cook one up and eat, which was an experience in itself. Breakdowns. So we had an old Tinny, I think it was like a 1986 hull. So that in itself had inherent issues, one of them being pinholes. So throughout the whole trip, we seemed to constantly have a new pinhole appearing, especially because it was an old riveted hull. So we also took some Selly's Need It and just used that. So there was a few times we'd dry dock the boat, pull it out of the water, flip it over, find the hole, and just put some Need It on it. That worked really well. Other issues that we had a too small a motor, so we put a bigger motor on it. We had a couple of issues with one of the fittings on the fuel tank, just being a bit finicky. So that was a bit annoying, but that's just because we just bought the boat and hadn't had any time using it. Other issues that we had were the biggest issue we had was we didn't have a GPS or a fish finder sound or anything like that. So we were flying along, trying to maintain.
You're talking about the crash.
I'm talking about the crash. Trying to maintain or drive the areas that looked deepest, but we were sitting on about 40k, and all of a sudden we just whacked something really hard and got thrown forward, and that ended up ripping the rivets off the transom and lifting the transom up, and we were lucky enough to be in, what was that town? Renmark, where the guys that looked after one of the other teams with the houseboats had a full workshop that he allowed us to use. So I was able to re-rivet and sicker the brackets back down, which was good. In terms of spares that we took, just with a 2-stroke motor, I had a spare fuel pump, spare impeller, spare spark plugs. I fully serviced the motor and the leg before we went. But yeah, that was about it, and I don't think there'd be anything that'd change. But then I had Sicker 291 and then a thing of Need It as well, which is probably exactly what I'd take again. Anchors.
We had one, eh?
We had an anchor. We had a big, typical anchor.
If you don't have to take a heavy anchor and you can get away with
a light one.
Do that. That's a massive weight save.
Especially in a small boat like ours, anchor was always like a danger point because it was always awkward putting stuff up against it. There's always a concern of bags rubbing through. Yeah. The other thing that we found really handy was having a biodegradable sort of degreaser or hand scrub and rags. Just when you're constantly in around a 2-stroke motor, mixing fuel and oil, you're always getting stuff on your hands. And so being able to have a dedicated biodegradable hand scrub. Phone service?
Yeah, if you're with Optus or Vodafone, forget it. Just, you're going off grid for a week. Telstra?
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, Telstra was pretty reliable along the whole length.
My phone reception was absolutely abysmal. From the moment we turned on the boat in Mildura, I was just pretty much a black spot until South Australia. It is what it is.
Go Telstra. Even if you just got like a prepaid LD SIM, just for the trip.
Lots of ferry crossings.
Lots of ferry crossings, and that's something that both of us have never been around.
Yeah, we sort of struggled to know the etiquette of when to go, when to wait, what distance was okay to proceed.
Yeah. And so pretty much every town there'll be a ferry crossing, and you got to really look out for the signs, especially in some of the areas where the river might be really wide. If you're shooting down the middle and you've been hooning for 3 hours, you're not really looking out for those little signs on the left or right. So you've still got to be mindful and give a visual of ferries, because they'll just be on one side loading up. And especially in terms of just etiquette with these small towns and trying to keep the relationship strong, it's really important to drop the speed down when you're going through those, and just giving a nice big clear berth. And if you see other people flying, just wave them down or let them know, because someone did it for us, which was thankful, because we didn't even register it, just because we'd been listening to the hum of the motor for 3 hours, and you're in a nice big open river. It's the last thing you're sort of thinking about.
If you can afford the time and you'll still arrive to the endpoint by nightfall, go explore. Like, pull off. There's lots of cool spots to explore, so don't rush it. Because before you know it, you're at the end and it's over. So each day, I guess, try and stop, find somewhere on the map that looks cool to explore, and hop out and go for a walk. Yeah. Where did we stay? Apex.
Yeah.
We stayed at the Apex. Do you call it Apex Holiday Park in Mildura,
which was on the water.
That's the ideal launch point, because the beach launch is directly connected to the caravan park. So highly recommend either getting a campsite or a cabin before you disembark, and it's just very relaxing. You can roll in, you've got time, your boat's close by, so definitely stay there. And then on the tail end at Manham, there's a couple of good, well, if you're looking for cheap campsites, there's one on the other side of the river, which is super cheap. I think it's by donation, which that's where we stayed, just for a night, just to gather and repack our bikes before we kicked off again. What was the highlight? I guess you can't rival some of the red cliffs. It's just
a big bend.
Big sections of red cliff that I just haven't seen before, so it was very special. And I keep mentioning the birds, but that was one of the big things for me, was just the amount of bird life that I saw throughout the whole journey.
There's definitely some cool parts, and we'll put some footage up just to show some of the cool sections. But there's also some cool pubs along the river as well, which was really nice to be able to have a cold beer.
The wool shed was nice, pulling up to the wool shed.
So in terms of costing, what it cost us, we did it as cheap as possible. So we bought a $1,200 tinny, and we had the tinny sold at the end of it, and we made like $200 on that. In terms of food, we ate pretty cheaply, having oats, bread and peanut butter, baked beans, eggs. We didn't take any alcohol with us. We definitely bought beers at the pubs. What else were our expenses?
Fuel. So 100 litres of fuel, plus some top-ups at whatever the going price of fuel is when you do your trip.
And 2 stroke oil of the trip.
The low point of the trip was just listening to the roar of a 2-stroke motor for 8 hours a day. Without adequate hearing protection, it does get a little bit old. So you're burning your hand on the tiller steer, and I don't want to be negative. Bring adequate hearing protection so that you can be protected from the noise of the 2-stroke, because it gets a bit overwhelming after a big chunk of hours. So that's somewhat, we neglected to respect how annoying a 2-stroke can be after 6 hours.
My low point was probably just having an old boat that we had to continually pull out of the water and dry dock. There was many times where, you'd want to just have a really nice chilled afternoon, and you've got like beautiful weather and you've got a great camping spot, but then it was taken up with emptying everything out of the boat, scull dragging it up, filling it with water, trying to find where the leak was, sanding it, cleaning it, patching it, and then putting it all back in and getting it back in the water to check that it's actually fixed. And because there was a few times where we'd then find a second hole, so then we'd have to do it all again.
So bring the best boat you can bring.
But it's all part of the adventure, and would we recommend doing it again?
Yeah, Tiger's saving up. We're buying a really, really good boat.
Yeah, big boat with cold beer, electric start,
yeah,
electric tilt trim.
yeah,
Yeah,
400 litre fuel tank.
400 litre fuel tank, enclosed aircon cab.
Pretty much a houseboat.
Yeah,
We're doing it in a houseboat again.
Yeah. But I think doing it in what we had was part of the adventure, and it made it fun, and it was a bit silly the amount of stuff we had in this little 12-foot tinny that had low sides. And I think that's part of it. It was like such a good adventure, and it's definitely something I'd do again. And if I wasn't heading overseas, I'd be on this current trip, trying to help out with it. Because I had a blast, and when I look back on all the footage and speak to people about it, like, I remember how much of an adventure it actually was. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's something you've ever thought about doing, I recommend doing it. This is you sort of bet there's a few stretches that are quite long, so if you can do it with a group of like-minded people that are all happy to help each other out,
Yeah.
and get each other through the long stretches, then absolutely go for it. This is probably your best chance to tick it off the list.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Especially, Dan, who runs it, absolute legend, and he'll do anything in his power to help you out, because he did that for us, and we'll able to reciprocate it, which was really nice. So definitely, if you've got questions, feel free to reach out, put a comment down, feel free to send us the message, reach out to Dan, he's more than happy to help answer anything that you've got. But definitely, if you're thinking about doing it, do it. And it's probably too late, because I know he's probably sold all the spots on all the trips he's got planned. So it just goes to show that, if you're wanting to do it, definitely book in and get it done. Sweet.
Right, let's cut that up and see how it goes.